just concluded the Shiva of Pioneer in Los Angeles, in Torah in Los Angeles, Rabbi Grumman. Rabbi Grumman Alav Shalom was a Rebbe of mine many, many years ago. And if you went into, or even now, go to his house, you find there's a boat. There's a big boat, a handcrafted boat. And there's pictures above the boat. And this is referring to the Gemara that says, Oilish Svina, woe is it to the ship? It's lost its captain. And there's pictures, 3 pictures, it's very interesting. Rabbi Grumman, who asked me for a picture of my Rashiva. He wanted to have Rashiva's picture as a photo picture on the captains of the boat. But he felt that there are certain Gedolim, fortunately we lost, who were the captains of the boat that steered America in a certain direction and brought something unique that wasn't there before them to America. And one of them is the pictures, of course, of Rav Aaron Kalva, who brought intense Europeanish learning to America, something that wasn't there before. And Rabbi Grumman felt that that was something that pioneering the Rav Aaron Kalva did. And to a similar extent, I think this was something, even though there was learning, there was Torah in Pico Robertson, but what we really needed was that intense yeshivish learning, Avrechem sitting and being osik b'Torah yom v'laylo, something very, very special. And that was something that was, for many years, was missing on this side of town. And I think with Rabbi Gradon bringing the Avrechem and bringing his kochos, bringing that, it's a special koach, and it really transformed Pico Robertson. Really made it into a different mahus. And so therefore it's very special not only to have Rabbi Gradon in his role in our community, but also to have him here on this day, to give, which he does all the time, but to give us special divrei chizuk and divrei hisorus that we need at this time. So it's really a special zchus and honor for all of us to have Rabbi Gradon address us at this time.
So the Gemara in Masechta Yuma, Daf Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara discusses if we're able to understand, to what extent we're able to understand what caused the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash and what caused the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So as you know, Mikdash Rishon Ibn Machorev, what were the reasons for the destruction of the first temple? Number one, so it says, because there were 3 cardinal sins that were performed at that time. They were the sins of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Haroyos, and Shvichas Damim. Those are the sins, and clearly sins like those are inconsistent with having Shechina among us, inconsistent with having the Rebbeinu Shalom reside among us. So it ended up with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, the Gemara a little bit further down the Yomud, Mikdash Sheni, Shoyu Oiskin B'Torah, Shoyoiskin Batayra Ubamitzvahs Ubegmilas Chasadim. It's an important word. But at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, when the Klal Yisrael was engaged in learning Torah, in performing mitzvahs, and even Gemilas Chasadim, caring for one another, so what caused it to be destroyed? Because they were practicing sinas chinam. The obvious conclusion from that is sheshkula sinas chinam keneged shalosh averos avodah zarah gilui arayos v'shichas damim. So you see that sinas chinam is equivalent in its impact and in its power of sin to the three cardinal sins, which is of course a massive chiddush. Sinas chinam is you feel bad towards somebody, you have bad thoughts about them, you're judgmental, you're unkind. Wouldn't sound like it's avodah zarah in gilui arayos and shvichas damim, murder, idol worship, and immorality. Sounds like there's sort of a gap between them. The Gemara equates them. And really the Gemara does more than equate them. The Gemara is a little bit further down the Om of the Gemara says the following. It says more like this. Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Loza, the Amri Travayu, Rishonim shenizgala avoinim nizgala kitzam, Achroinim shelo nizgala avoinim lo nizgala kitzam. In the first Beis Hamikdash, the sins were clear. Once they were stopped in their tracks. Once it became clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wasn't going to be so to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, they took stock and they saw this is a totally immoral, amoral society. Society with its murder, gilui arayos, avodah zarah. That's not a sustainable situation, and because they were nizgala avoinam, it was nizgala kitzam. It was possible to know how long the golus would be and how difficult the golus would be, because there was a way to correct it. They would correct those sins, and that would turn the tables. However, achareinim shelo nizgala avoinam. But at the time of the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash, where it wasn't clear to them what the sin was, lo nizgali kitzam, it was impossible to predict how long that exile caused by the sinas chinam would extend, because they weren't able to recognize, they weren't able to accept, they weren't able to be responsive, take responsibility for the fact that they were practicing sinas chinam. They don't feel it, they don't notice it, so they can't fix it. They don't fix it. There's no end. There's no solution. Says the Gemara, Amar Rish Lakish. No, they have a discussion. Which was the worst scenario? The first Beis Hamikdash or the second? So, Amar Rish Lakish Adarab Achroinim Adifi Afagav Dikashibud Malchus Kaski B'Torah. Rish Lakish wanted to say, people at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash were better people at the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, because despite all the pressures and external pressures they had, they were learning Torah. So he responded to him and said to him, what do you mean? How can you say that? Amalei bira tachiach. The Beis Hamikdash proves you wrong. Shechazor rishonim v'lo chazor acharonim. You see, the Beis Hamikdash came back for the people of the first temple. It was only lost 70 years. In fact, there were people who were alive at the destruction of the first temple who were also alive at the consecration of the second temple. So that was a 70-year period. But by the Beis Hamikdash Sheni, we're talking hundreds and now thousands of years, and we haven't gone back to the Beis Hamikdash. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's message to us that He isn't satisfied. So how can you possibly try and present me with an argument that the people of the Beis Sheni were in a choshev and madrega, when through them we have forfeited Beis Hamikdash for an eternity, whereas the Beis Rishon was only lost for 70 years. So the Gemara is clearly telling us that the chomer of sinas chinam. Chavetz Chaim, as you know, in the Akdama to the Sefer Chavetz Chaim, so he writes from the Yerushalmi that sinas chinam is equivalent to Lashon Hara. Sinas chinam, this empty, baseless hatred, is equivalent or the same thing as talking Lashon Hara, because it's also baseless nonsense. To investigate this a little bit, try to understand what it is we're trying to say. The Gemara, there's one line we've left out. We've mentioned this in previous years. The Gemara says the following. Rabbi Yochanan, he was the one, of course, who was having the machlokes with Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan, Toiva tziparnon shel rishonim mikreiso shel acharonim. Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say that the fingernail of the people who lived in the first temple was more important and more valuable than the stomach of the people who lived in the second temple. Type of funny discussion is this. This one's nail, this one's stomach. It's weird things. So the Vilna Gaon, as I've told you before, the Vilna Gaon, in a very unbelievable presentation in this sugya, says the following. As you know, in the Medrash compares the different galuyos, the different exiles that we have spent through our millennia, compares them to different animals. The Gentiles who destroyed our life and took us into exile and continued to destroy us in the exile, sometimes they'll compare it to the Goddess Edom, the goddess we're in now, is compared to a chazir. We understand that very simply. Chazir is the most despicable thing. They're the most despicable people. But you'll see in a second, it's far more profound than that. And earlier ones are compared to animals, different animals. So it says the Vilna Gaon, the Gemara means like this. There are animals who chew the cud, but they don't have split hooves. So they're not kosher. There are animals that have split hooves, but they don't chew the cud. They're also not kosher. The chazir has split hooves. So Chazal say he stretches out his front feet and he shows you, here, take a look at me. I'm kosher. Just take a look. I have the split hooves. But he's not chewing the cud. So he's not kosher at all, but he's hiding that. The other animals that chew the cud but don't have a split hoof don't look kosher whatsoever, but they have a very strong kosher siman. So the Vilna Gaon says the Gemara is saying that tziporen, which was the hoof, the nail of the animals that weren't kosher because it wasn't split, was less of a problem than the stomach of the chazir, which isn't regurgitating the food and isn't allowing it to chew the cud. That's a bigger chizar. It's eternal. The other one is external. So the chewing cud factor, it's not a share in kashrus now, but the chewing the cud factor is a more important contribution to the kashrus of the animal than the hoof factor. And that's what's missing in Edom, and that's not what's missing in the Golos Rishon from Bavel. And Afkaminah is like this. The way HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes us is a reflection of the sin that we did. If he chose to punish us with a people whose weakness is hidden, that means our weakness is also hidden. It's not apparent. If he punishes us with a nation compared to someone where their weakness is exposed, that means our weakness is also exposed. It's easier for a person to understand that murder is wrong. Eventually, I imagine, except for people who are total psychopaths, most murderers eventually do tshuva. I'm not saying they do tshuva the way the Rambam says to do tshuva, but they chap at a certain point, this is not the way to live. Could be they do Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos is also possible, maybe. But people who practice sinas chinam don't have that ability. Sinas chinam, and I'll prove to you, I've said this many times, it bears repeating, I'll prove to you that people who do sinas chinam don't recognize their sin. The Yerushalmi Gemara says, the Shalmi Talmud says, that all the time the Beis HaMikdash has not been rebuilt, it's as if it's been destroyed again. So on an annual basis when we stand here, we're not standing commemorating the original destruction, we're standing commemorating the destruction, the present destruction. Kol dor shelo nivne biyomav, kilu nechrab biyomav. Any generation which it wasn't destroyed in its lifetime, So which it wasn't built in his lifetime, as if it was destroyed. So right now we're sitting here without a Beis HaMikdash. It's being destroyed. What's destroying it? Well, the Gemara said, what's destroying is Sinas Chinam. But if I were to go to any Jew, anywhere in the whole world, and say to the person, you practice Sinas Chinam, the person will be flabbergasted. He said, you don't know who I am. So the chutzpah is this. I'm a person, I go to the Chofetz Chaim Shurim, and I read the Chofetz Chaim Sefer, and I listen to all the Shurim and the videos on Tisha B'Av. I know all about Sinas Chinam. How dare you accuse me of that? So I'm terribly sorry, I apologize. If I had enough time, I would then go to the next, 100,000 Jews I meet, or 500,000, and I won't find one who says they do Sinas Chinam. Everybody's offended by the suggestion. But if you tell a person, I'm not convinced you keep Shabbos perfectly, not that you drive, and not that you write or you smoke, but that maybe Muktzah isn't, you aren't careful with Muktzah, maybe you aren't careful with the Tfilis of Shabbos, maybe you aren't careful what you say on Shabbos, so then you could probably persuade him that with a little bit of care he could improve that. But you can't get him to admit that he does Sinas Chinam, because Sinas Chinam, we're so accustomed to it, we've so assimilated it. When somebody says, my next door neighbor's a really bad guy, he's this, he's that, you say, no, that might be Lashon Hara. He said, what do you mean Lashon Hara? Every time I come home at night, he's parking in the street, there's no room for me, he's got 8 cars, he does this. So to point out to the person, when something is true, it can still be Lashon Hara. So, no, but this guy's a really bad guy. So, I don't have to explain to you, we're all in the same boat. So, you see that we have zero sensitivity for these things, zero. And it's all justified by the fact that when I have antipathy towards somebody, it's because I don't like it, it's because I'm right. I'm right for feeling that way. So the question is, how do we get rid of it? This is a disease. This is a terminal, critical disease that we aren't producing a vaccine for. So what is the vaccine, or more correctly, what is the tikkun? What is the tikkun for this chait? How are you going to masakin the chait? Now there's a fabulous, interesting shaila in the Rishonim on the pasuk V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Everybody knows the pasuk V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It's, the whole conservative and reform movement would collapse if they wouldn't have this pasuk. They have the pasuk wrong anyway, and they only got half of the pasuk, and they got the wrong pshat in the pasuk. But at least they have the pasuk, something. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I'm busy with loving my neighbor like myself. You know that the Ramban in Chumash, and that pasuk asks the obvious question. Kadosh Baruch Hu can't command somebody something that's impossible. Whatever it means to love yourself, I don't know, you're not a therapist, not a mental health professional. I can't tell you what the technical terms mean to love. Whatever you feel about yourself, you'll never feel about somebody else. As much as you think you love your wife and your children and your parents as like yourself, more than yourself, but it's just not true. Whatever the person's kesher to themselves is, a connection to themselves, it's stronger than anybody else. So what type of mitzvah is this? If Kadosh Baruch Hu should tell you, if you have to l'reich, it's enough. You should love somebody else dearly. That's enough of a commandment. Why is he saying kamocha? So the Ramban and other Rishonim say it doesn't mean the emotion. The pshat in the pasuk is not you have to generate an emotion of love for that person as emotionally fired you are towards yourself, because that is indeed, says the Ramban, impossible. What it means is that you should understand to conduct yourself with acts of love to somebody else the way that you would expect for yourself. So for instance, if a person was in hospital, there's a group of friends, there's a tight group of friends, they're always together with one another, they help one another. One of their members was in hospital and was there for a week. So they arranged that there should be 18 hours a day, friends should be sitting in the hospital round the clock, nearly round the clock, to help watch this chayla. That means in addition to the hospital staff, they had somebody from their circle would be there all the time. And Baruch Hashem, the person recovers, begins well. Then a couple of months later, a different member of the group falls ill. And another member of the group falls ill, and they have another meeting. These friends get together, have a meeting, and the person who was in hospital and who was watched for 18 hours a day makes a suggestion: we should have a 12-hour daily watch. Says, I don't understand. When you were in hospital, we were there 18 hours. And why are you saying for this other person it's good enough 12 hours? Whatever you have for yourself, for sure you should want for somebody else. You're a beneficiary, you know what it meant. So you should be for sure promoting the idea that he should have 18 hours. That's the Ramban's understanding of the pasuk. Don't put boundaries and limits on what you want to do for other people, anything other than you would want for yourself. You might not do it with the same passion, you might not do it with the same energy, but l'kol hapachas, try and have a framework and a guideline of how you're going to do this based on what you expect for yourself. But the Mukubalim don't agree with this. This is the pshat of the Rishonim, ha'iskim beniglim. But the Mukubalim don't agree with this. The Mukubalim, you should know b'chlal that something very fascinating. The greatest revelation of pshat is always in the Mukubalim. They take everything has to be 100% literal. They have a way of, you'll see in a second, they have a way of making it literal with seichel. But they're the greatest makpidim that the pshat should be exactly the words. We have a pasuk, v'ahavta l'recha kamecha, and they're not going to move. They're not going to allow you to say a pshat other than you're obligated to love the person like yourself. But what are you going to do? The Ramban asked a question. There's no answer to that question. If you're honest, there's no answer to that question. So let me share with you teaching of Rav Moshe Kolavir Zechar Nevracha from Talmud Dvarim. This Talmud Dvarim is mamish Tisha B'Av Be'etzim. It writes like this. The Talmud Dvarim is a set of, we know the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, that we say Hashem Hashem Ke'Racham V'Chanun. In Micha there's another set of Yud Gimel, and the Kubalim are very busy with these set of Midas HaRachamim. The fourth Midas HaRachamim the Talmud Dvarim is talking about is called She'eris Nachaloso. She'eris Nachaloso, which, the Lashon She'er in the Torah, She'er Ksusa V'Inoso, She'er means someone who's close to you, a close relative. The wife of a person is called She'eru, someone extremely close to you. Says the Ramak like this: you should be aware, when you appeal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you should know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu conducts himself towards the Jewish people saying, Mo'es li Yisrael v'heim kroivai, she'er basar li imahem. What am I going to do with these Jewish people? There are people complaining about them, there are the Malachim complaining about them, there's Kitrugim happening in the Shemayim, in the Bezin Shomala, people are coming and complaining. These celestial elements are coming to complain. And I should really surrender, and I should really accept the complaints. What I'm meant to do. But these are my children. These are my kroivim, they're my children. They're close to me. She'er basa li imayim. It's as if I was a physical relation of theirs. She'ein bazug HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are, for one prism, they're considered to be his partner in terms of being married. And the korali biti achoisi imi, and we refer to them as my sister, my daughter, my sister, and my mother. Or could appear in Shirim Rabbo. Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu writes in Tehillim, Yisrael am kroivai, mamish kurva yeshli mohem ubanai heim. V'hainu l'she'eris nachlasad loshen she'er basar. It's if a mother gave birth to a child, a mother gave birth to a daughter, so she she'er basar with that daughter. That's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us. Now this, only the Mukubalim dare talk about this. This is Sof kol sof, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no form, has no shape, has no body. What's it meant to mean? So I don't know what it means either. I have no idea what I'm reading. But I can read the words. As soon as I know, I'm telling you this to you. And since sof hem nachlasoi, since after all said and done, we are so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Uma oimar imani shem harakev olai. So if I'm going to punish them, I'm going to suffer. I'm the mother, I'm the father. I'm going to punish them, it's going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt them. I'm not going to do this. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's opening approach, his opening gambit to considering what he has to do with us. And says something that's too Kabbalistic even to attempt to say. So that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with Klal Yisrael, is a relationship as if we were physical kroivim, and that gives us a chance that he'll be merachem even when perhaps he shouldn't be merachem. He should be merciful even when perhaps he doesn't want to be or shouldn't be merciful. Now listen carefully what's again to us. I'm going to try and say a chiddush today. Tisha was not a day of chiddushim, but I just will explain what he says here. But you know there's a Gemara that says give me a second. It'll come to you in a second. I'll mention in a second. Read what it says here. Keina Adam Chavera. When you look interpersonal relationships, how do you view another Jew? What is your shaykhis to another Jew? I want to say, Kala poisel b'muma poisel. Chazal say, when a person brings harsh criticism on another person, it's generally with the chisaron, with the weakness that he himself has. I repeat, Chazal say, Kala poisel b'muma poisel. When a person has a weakness, and you see him being very tough on somebody else and highly critical, it's generally with the weakness that he has of himself. So I want to tell you why it is that way. So says the Ramak like this. Kol Yisrael heim she'er basa elu melu. All Jews doesn't mean your brother and your mother and your sister and your cousin. All the Jews you don't like. The guy whose beard is too long, the guy whose beard is too short, the guy who wears a black hat, a blue hat, a straw hat, the guy who shaves, the guy who doesn't shave, the guy who's Sephardi, the guy who's Ashkenazi, the guy who's all three of them, the guy who's a Breslov and a Lubavitcher, all the people you got 68,000 opinions about, all those people are your brothers. Now we don't mean brothers in the street sense of using that word. You'll see what he means here. Because all the people who are Jewish have neshamas which are wrapped up one in another. And here he says something, it's not for today, it requires explanation, not for Tisha B'Av, but he says that if Jews get together and do a mitzvah, it's inestimably more powerful than the individual doing it. But it's even more than that. If you have 10 people doing a mitzvah, a minyan, and we're all bound up one with another, so I'm one, and all the other 9 people who came in are somehow bound up with me, and I'm bound up with them. So every one of us represents 10 people, so there's already 100 forces here. You thought you had only 10, but you have already 100 forces here. Not for now, he explains things with that. Listen to these words. Literally, every Jew has a particle inside himself of every other Jew. There's a particle of you in every Jew in the world, and there's a particle of that person in every Jew in the world. And you are an entity that obviously principally is you, whatever that means, but in addition to being principally you bear with you millions of chalakim that all come from every other Jews in the world. There's an achdus haneshama, there is a yichud haneshamas, ichud haneshamas. This is obviously a completely spiritual factor, and it creates a matzav whereby you are directly related. It doesn't mean halachically, but spiritually, kabbalistically, you are directly related and connected to every Jew in the world. מפני שממש יש בכל אחד חלק אחד מחברו, כשחוטא אחד פוגם עצמו או פוגם חלק אשר לחברו בו. So now, if I do a sin, so I'm damaging my neshama. I'm damaging your neshama also, because one particle of your neshama is over here. That might be a tiny particle, because how much can you contribute to every Jew in the world? But something about you, even though you never met me and don't know me and don't recognize me, something has shifted in your spiritual caliber because of the chelik of you that's in me. It's affected. This has unlimited ramifications. Nimtza mitzad ha'chelik hahu chaverov oriv olav. Im keinem sha'azem zen. He says, in addition, this explains the concept of Kol Yisrael arevim zeh. We all responsible one for another. So until now we thought it's a halachic concept. Kodesh Baruch Hu said you're responsible. So if I make Kiddush Friday night, and I make Kiddush, and I said every word of Kiddush, and I had the right wine and the right bread, I did the mitzvah perfectly, and in walks a lady 10 minutes later who didn't have Kiddush, and she doesn't know how to make Kiddush, she wants me to make Kiddush for her, I'm allowed to go make the Kiddush over again, with all the words, with all the brachas, even though it was Yotzei, because I'm responsible for her. He says, you know why you're responsible for her? Because part of her is in you. You didn't, that part of the chiv you didn't do. This is something that we need the mitzvah, hasn't been discharged, and you have a shaykhus to it, direct shaykhus to it, as does every other Jew. Olekach, says the remark. You ready? This is what the shir is about. We're saying now. Therefore, a person should want the good for every other Jew. And when your friend succeeds, you should be happy, and you should be included. You should feel great. And his honor and the amount of honor he gets for his mitzvah and his events should be just as important for you as yours. Sharing hu mamish, because he's in you and you're in him. So if he's being successful, you're being successful, and if you're being successful, he's being successful. You should love yourself the way you love. You should love your chava the way you love yourself is literal. Because when you're loving yourself, you think it's all you, but it's not all you. There's parts of all the Eden inside you. So when you're busy feeling close to yourself, already you feel close to him. And that obligation has to be translated not just from the world of theory into Lamaisa. And just the same passion you have yourself, you have for him, because wherever he is, you are, and wherever you are, he is. And therefore, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want to hear and participate in our tzaras and our suffering. He'd rather we didn't have it, and we shouldn't behave that way, and he wouldn't have to bring it upon us. So exactly the same thing is true of another Jew. So what does all this mean in English? In English, what this means is that the reason that we're able to practice sin is chinam because we're apikarsim. The only thing is we're apikarsim b'shaygi, because we're ignorant, not because we want to be apikarsim, but because nobody in the world wants to hurt themselves. Forget about hurting other people. Maybe they claim they don't want to hurt other people, but nobody who's of sound mind wants to hurt themselves. So when you're speaking badly about this other person, him includes you. So you're speaking about yourself, partly also. I want to say that's possibly why Chazal said kol ha-posel b'mumoy posel. When you point out somebody else's weaknesses, it's something you're familiar with. It's because maybe it's you inside there that's causing the problem, and you're very familiar with that. You live with it, and when you see it manifest in someone else, you say, "Oh, I recognize that." But maybe it's your contribution to him. Maybe that's the part of you that's settled in him. He may be a fine person. You may be destroying him. That's what you have to worry about. That your chelek in him is the one that you're recognizing, and that's the one you're familiar with, and that's the one that's causing the issues. Be that as it may, whether that's the right pshat or not the correct pshat. But the point is, when you look at another Jew, you have to understand that Kodesh Baruch Hu created us as not independent people. And now you can understand, Rav Yitzchak of Lozhner, the son of Reb Chaim Lozhner, writes in that Dhamma, in a note, he says, Koi hoyu dvarov elai tamid. My father constantly repeated to me again and again, that what? That the Adam loyla atzma nivra, a person wasn't created for themselves, elo lahoyil lezulos, but to be effective and helpful to other people. Sort of a funny thing is that it was created to be helpful for other people. I thought it was created for myself. But the answer is, since there is no yourself, there's no yourself who's independent of other people, and there's no other person who's independent of you. So you can't look at the other person as being a disturbance, or as nothing to do with me, because there's a chelik of you in him. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did that deliberately to unite everybody. And that's the greatest unifying factor in the world. And for the Beis HaMikdash to be rebuilt, it needs that all of Klal Yisrael is united, because everybody's in everybody. So how are you going to this? We can't even take one segment out and say you're different, because you're not different, because you're connected to everybody else. So how are you different? So if we want to think about combating sinas chinam before we open our mouth or we think, and we paint a picture of somebody negatively, or say negative things about a person, we should say to ourselves, speaking about yourself, and you're bringing a negative picture on Klal Yisrael, including yourself. And when people say things about you don't like it, you say, maybe true that I get angry, but there's a reason I get angry. Maybe I do eat too much, but there's a reason I eat too much. Maybe I waste a lot of time, but there's a reason. So how comes you're not thinking about the other person who's also you? Even if he wasn't you should think that way. But Kal V'chomer that he is you, he gave you a tool. Forget about the theory. Maybe in the theory you should do this without you being inside them. But the fact is you are inside them. So it's just totally foolish. You lost complete perspective of who you are and what you are, what your mission is. And your mission is to build a world. The mission is to build a Kadosh Baruch Hu's world, and you can't build it by yourself. You can only do it with other people, because other people are in you and you're in them. And that's why if a Kadosh Baruch Hu sees Chalakim of Klal Yisrael who are all getting left out, you have to understand when there's, whatever it's 80% of Klal Yisrael that's disconnected completely, it means 80% of you is disconnected. There's particles of you spread everywhere around all people who eat on Yom Kippur and eat in Tisha B'Av, who you have a poor opinion about. Who are you? So instead of having the poor opinion, what about worrying about it, doing something? If you don't know what to do, at least daven, but at least don't be critical. Or at least feel the pain, feel like Kadosh Baruch Hu's pain. It's a totally different world from the world we think. The Ramak just restructured the entire world forever. You can never think the same way you thought until now. Yes, and sometimes you're suffering for what bad things they do, and they're dragging you down. That's also true. But you cannot do anything about that. But the Kol HaPachas, the Averis you're doing, dragging other Jews down, and your criticism and your harsh words and your negative view of people is dragging yourself down, because you're in there also. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is upset with the whole thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can't tolerate it because it's all his children. So you understand why there can't be Beis HaMikdash. People can stop doing murder. They can stop doing immorality. But they're not able to stop. And instead of taking responsibility for themselves and understanding how they have to fix themselves, they found the easy way out to destroy other people. But it doesn't work, because you're destroying yourself. And therefore, that's why it gets worse and worse. And that's why Lo Nizgal Avoinam, they don't see the sin, and that's why there can't be a dictated end for the Golos. The only way there can be a dictated end for the Golos is we'll recognize the sin, and we'll stop, explaining it away, and we'll stop persuading ourselves that it's okay. We need to be able to understand it's our responsibility for ourselves, and if we'll take each one responsibility for ourselves, this will change things, beyond any possible imagination of what could be accomplished. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help Mitzvah B'Korov that we should do so that we can be Zecher to the Gula Shalem.